Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I see the number of participants going up slowly but surely. So we'll give everyone a couple of minutes to join. How are you, Joe? Excited for this session?
Super excited. Yeah, always excited to be working with Alexa. Always got some exciting things going on, and it's really an honor.
You're too kind. Well, the honor is on us. It's always great to catch you. I know you're super busy, so we really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Yeah, and how many people do we have signed up?
I think we're close to 100. So far, we have about 40 people joining in. So we'll give everyone just a couple more minutes to jump in on the link. Great. Good afternoon if you're just joining us. We're going to give everyone a couple more minutes before we get started. Perfect. It's 1:01, so maybe we can give everyone just an extra minute or so, and we can get started, Joe.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm looking over the participants to see if there's anyone I know here. I definitely see some familiar names. So hi, everyone that I know. Hi, Judy. Definitely see some nice, some familiar names from other workshops. Super happy to see you.
A small, tight-knit community, huh?
Definitely. Yeah. And hi to everyone I don't know, of course, and welcome. It's nice to meet you.
Great. So it's 1:02. So I will maybe we can get started. People can slowly finish joining in whenever they can. So hello everyone. Welcome back again to our last session for the AI certification course. So today we have the pleasure of having Joe with us for this session and to help us wrap up the course. So Drew, if you want to get us started on the presentation, we can kick things off.
Oh, let's see here. Is this showing? Okay, I'm running the presentation,
Perfect.
right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Great. So we'll start maybe with some quick introductions. Joe, I know you well known by everyone in the industry, but for people that don't have the pleasure of seeing your face, you can go ahead and just give everyone a quick introduction.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me today. And I do have a French name, but I am an Anglophone. My name is Joachim. I usually just go by Joe. I have a Francophone family from France and from Belgium, but grew up in the USA. I've been living in Quebec for the past 15, 16 years, something like that. And I'm very active as a translator. I have my own translation firm, Traduction Lyon. I'm also I taught university courses in translation for close to 15 years. And now in recent years, I've been focusing a little bit more on training through various organizations and through my new academy. So I'm I feel very fortunate to have a profession that I enjoy so much and to rub shoulders with some of the wonderful people in this industry. So yeah, thank you all for being here. And yeah, over to Lucia.
Thanks, Joe. Pleasure to have you, especially to wrap up the session. I know we have a good one planned out. So my name is Lucia. You already know me. I've been running this webinar. I work with the team at Alexa. And I am in business development. So we can move on to maybe a quick recap from the session of last week. So last week we had the pleasure of having Kate host a session for us. Joe, if you want to move over to the next slide. Perfect. So Kate hosted a session for us. She gave us an insight as to how their team implemented Alexa. So one of a few highlights from this session, when you implement a technology, I know this is obvious to some of you, but it's never a straight line. So it's never from 0 to 100. You always have some challenges. There are always things that go awry. So Kate was kind enough to share some of the feedback, some of the things that worked, that didn't work for her team, and how they were able to successfully implement the technology. Some of the key takeaways or some of the key things that they put together to make it successful was, first of all, to take it slow. So the implementation has taken more than a year and it's still ongoing. So it wasn't like flipping a switch from 0 to 100, like we said. Part of their success was also to include colleagues and team members in the discussion. So it was a collective effort. Everyone was consulted. There were surveys that were being run. Everyone from the team felt very much included in the process. And also to make it fun. So Kate was kind enough to share some example where a machine got it right, and then some examples when our machine got it very, very well. So without further ado, Joe, I will let you get started with today's session. I know we have quite a packed agenda, so you can move on to the next slide if you want. Perfect.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And I really love those takeaways. I think they're going to tie in very nicely with what we're going to look at today. This session is really about mindset and about how we respond to change and technological change in particular. So we're going to sort of start with the big picture and zoom in. I also want to mention, usually in a workshop, we do introductions with all the participants, but we have close to 100 people signed up. So if you're writing in the chat, hello, and I'm super happy to see you. We're just not going to do individual introductions because we have so many people here, but I'm very glad to have you here. So we're going to start today with a little bit of background to talk about change and sort of what's going on. This is going to be sort of a roadmap, sort of like you are here in terms of what's happening more broadly as a society. We're then going to move on to talk about one size fits all to tailoring. So sort of how we can make a pivot or a shift to respond in a way that's not only productive, but enjoyable. And I like that fun piece. I like that you mentioned fun. That's important. Because the idea is to see how we can make technologies useful and not feel like they're being imposed on us. That's super important. And so that sense of ownership and agency is a critical piece. So we're going to talk about sort of changing our perspective or considering other perspectives. So going from a sort of monolithic, there's one thing out there, NMT is here, to let's look at more specifically when we can use these tools and when we won't use these tools. And so we'll look at one size fits all versus tailoring. We'll then dive into shifting the mindset from servant to master, sort of look at who's in charge here with NMT. And we'll leave off with switching from a win-lose to a win-win sort of mindset. And this is something that I've really developed over the years working with business coaches. I've been fortunate to have several great business coaches that have really helped me to develop as a translator and as a business person. And so all of them focused a lot on the importance of win-win solutions. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit today. So please feel free to make this your therapy session. Feel free to write in the chat. This is not intended to be a formal lecture, although I do have some content for you. I'd really like to hear from you. And this is also a forum for sharing your concerns, for sharing things that you're happy about, things you're concerned about. You know, you've had a good deal of material you've looked at through the other 3 modules. This is sort of a time of integration, assimilation, and having a frank conversation. So please feel absolutely free to jump in at any time.
I'll keep an eye on the Q&A section. So for all our participants, you know the process by now. Feel free to just reach out to us via the Q&A section, and I'll bring up the question to the attention of Joe.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, well, let's launch into it. So you're probably aware by now that digital technology has really gained a lot of prominence and become much a bigger part of our life than before the pandemic. So the pandemic has brought about a lot of changes, not just in the translation world, but really in many, many different industries and sectors. And so we see a lot of changes that are not going away and things that we thought would go back to normal that are just not going back to normal. I'm thinking of my wife who works at a graphic design firm, and you know, she was sure that everyone would be going back in person, but now that employees have the option of going back in person or working from home, most of them are working from home, and so they're trying to actively find ways to encourage people to come back to the office, but they're finding there are actually benefits to staying home, you know, for everyone at the end of the day. It's a very interesting thing that's going on, and I think we're seeing that reflected in many different areas of our lives where there's just it's sort of a more online world than it was before. I want to give you a few figures because sometimes, just one or two charts can speak volumes, and it helps us also to get out of just talking about translation and sort of thinking about where we're headed more broadly. So these are projections about the language services, the language services industry. So you can see that the projections before were that like by 2021, the market would be around would be appraised around a close to $52 billion market, for example. And you see that that's sort of, these projections were based on sort of same old, a continuous progression. And by the way, this is already great news because, we have been saying in translation for at least the past decade that the volumes are increasing. And that is reflected in the actual statistics, the ones supplied by agencies and governments, and the ones compiled by independent experts. So the volumes have been growing in translation. The demand has been growing very broadly and consistently over the years. But take a look at what happened in 2021. So the projected figure, just to go back here, close to 52 billion, right? 51.6. And the actual total, as appraised by Statista, we're talking about over 56 billion. That's a pretty big jump in 1 year. And the figures are not yet in for 2022, but they will be hopefully in February or March. And it'll be very interesting to see if this trend has continued. I suspect that it absolutely will be reflected that this, just the same exponential growth is going to continue. And I'll tell you why. We see that certain trends have been sort of transformed, and I wanted to share this chart from McKinsey and Company. So the COVID-19 crisis has accelerated the digitization of customer interactions by several years, and you can see sort of the figures pre-crisis. So these are overall customer interactions, all industries combined, and you can see that there's just been like this ginormous jump, right? So it's just been a huge increase that was quite unexpected. And you can see also that in terms of the share of offerings that are digital in nature, there's also been this huge jump during the pandemic. So this is a sort of an interesting question I might ask you, and you can write in the chat, are you observing that you have more translation work as a result of the pandemic? I certainly find that I have more work. And I have different types of clients. Some kinds of people before that didn't bother having an online presence suddenly are offering online services because that's where their clients are now. And so, and other, I have certain clients that never would have dreamed of having a website before, but now they're getting a huge, 10 or 20,000 word website translated because they need that online presence in such an online world.
And Joe, if I may, while participants are digesting these numbers and thinking of their day-to-day, it has been the case for us at Alexa. So we've seen a big jump and a big increase over the last couple of years, and the types of conversations that we have with clients are completely different. So similar to your experience. If I look at some of the conversations that we had with our panelists over the last couple of weeks, it was echoed as well by Kate. So her team has seen a massive increase in volume of translation, as well as it was the same thing for Betty. Even when she worked with PwC a couple of years back, she already saw this trend pre-COVID, just the increase on that side as well, for sure. Katharina is saying it sounds like a good time to move into marketing translation, digital translation, and transcreation. Is that something that you've seen, Joe? So big demand for those specific skills?
Absolutely, and that raises a very significant point that I do feel is topical, which is sort of the areas where there is a lot of work and where there is not a lot of work. I have participants who have done workshops with me who have told me, Joe, my work has plummeted during the pandemic. And sometimes it's because they were working in an area that was really hard hit by some aspect of the pandemic. I had one participant who told me, she was specializing in traduction vinicole, so the wine industry. Yeah. And because of Brexit and other factors, and in the pandemic, there was just this massive drop. And so, but then conversely, people in the medical field, for example, have been having a field day the pandemic, because there's so much medical translation. Like it's just, I keep thinking of my wife's company, but they do pharmaceutical jobs, and they've gone
Okay.
from 60 to something like 90 employees just during the pandemic. So that's like over 30% growth that they've experienced. So it's pretty impressive, but it does depend what area you're working in. You might be thinking, well, that's nice, but my work hasn't gone up. And so it's true that certain areas have been favored. I think there's no hiding it. There's no way around it. Marketing is fantastic. If you're able to do SEO translation as well, that's very much in demand. Um, I think marketing is definitely a good one. I'm personally translating a lot of blogs these days. I just have these massive blog translation and app translation gigs that are like bigger than most of the jobs I've gotten in the past. So certainly, I think the more you're familiar with keywords online and search engine optimization, more you're going to have a leg up on the competition for sure. Those are good areas to get into. So just to stay on track here with the presentation, so this is an interesting figure right here. This is a graph on technology adoption, and you can see executives say their companies responded to a range of COVID-19 related changes much more quickly than they thought possible before the crisis. So look at the anticipated time to start using various advanced technologies and operations. Expected 672, actual 26.5. So an acceleration factor of 25 with respect to advanced technology use in, fundamental operation. So very interesting. And I think we're going to continue to see the demand be very strong in those areas in translation as well. So, and it shows that we can adapt, right? Thought that it would take all this time to adapt, and yet companies have had to adapt. They say necessity is the mother of invention, and I think we've certainly been seeing that. And I wanted to conclude this section with a few figures on executive mindsets. So executive mindset on technology's strategic importance has changed radically during the crisis, and shifting more to sort of the mentality that technology, it's not just about keeping up with technology. That's what everyone was talking about before the pandemic, right? Keeping up with new technologies and new translation. We heard a lot of that in various conferences around the world. With the pandemic, what we're seeing more and more in the way people are talking about technology, and executives in particular, is seeing it more like we need to invest in technology to make it a competitive advantage. So that's a very significant shift that's reflected in the numbers. And I feel like there is a connection in translation, because we can sort of see it the same way. The more we invest in our technologies, the more we get out of it, because we're suddenly able to offer certain things to our clients. So to give you one example that I think is so important, and this might be your biggest takeaway from the workshop, because this is sort of the core part of my message, is that if you are able to use a technology that you know well, for example, neural machine translation from Alexa AI that's specialized in your field or specializing in Canadian texts. Well, if you're able to use that technology, you may be able to offer your client faster turnaround times. And the way you can introduce it to them is tell them, hey, I'm able to offer these texts faster at no extra cost to you. And when you stop and think about it, in what other industry are we currently seeing things being offered either that are superior or that are faster without an increase in the price? We're not seeing that anywhere. My bank raises its rates every quarter, like clockwork, and they don't give any justification for it. And so in translation, I think this is good news for us, because using these technologies, we are able to serve our clients better. We can gain a little bit of time during the drafting process, and that's a competitive advantage. So I feel it really ties in with this idea of investing to be able to offer competitive advantage that's going to be sort of a winning solution for us, but also for our clients. Lucia, did you have anything you wanted to add on?
Astonished by the numbers. A quick question for you, Joe. When you mention investing, it's not necessarily in dollars, right? So what does the investment represent for some of the people that you work with? Is it more time spent on a new technology? What does it look like?
Right. Well, that's a fantastic point. I'm so glad you brought it up. I think that The investment is in terms of time, yes, to get to know the tool, also in terms of training so that you're proficient with that tool. If you go see the doctor, you expect them to know their tools inside out, inside and out, upside down and backwards. And ideally, we should know our tool as well as other professionals know their tools. And so I think taking the time to get to know it, doing some training to get up to speed, those are just as significant as the dollars we put into, acquiring licenses and things like that. So that's an excellent point. And it is an investment, and we should take that into account in our pricing as well. These technologies are not free, and the training is not free. Our time is not free. And so, I personally have not lowered my rates as a result of changes in the technologies I've used. I've only increased them or kept them the same. So I don't want to make this whole workshop on pricing, but that tends to be sort of a critical point for so many of us who are unsure how to respond, whether that's at an agency level or a freelance translator. So that's sort of my take on it.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for the note, Joe.
Absolutely. So in terms of us as language professionals, what does all this mean? All this change, all this, the technology that's being brought into our everyday lives? Well, the virtualization of services is huge. So this means we have lots of work, which is fantastic. I think before the pandemic, again, the idea was we need to adapt, we need to cope, we need to learn the ropes of technologies. And today it's really more like, hey, the more I invest in this, the more it's going to pay off for me. Even if you're a freelancer, if you're using the right tool, the right NMT solution, the right memory or online platform for the kind of work you do, it can pay really handsomely. It can pay off really well. And for your client as well, because even if you don't change your rates, or even if you raise your rates, they're getting their work more quickly most of the time, even if it's just 10% more quickly than before, using these options to speed up the drafting a little bit. So it's very interesting to see, essentially, the more you invest, the more you start to see the real benefits for you and for your business. Whereas before the pandemic, before NMT, because they're almost concurrent, right? NMT became widely available with DeepL around 2017. I think here, 2016, 2017 here in Canada, and only started becoming better known like a year or two after that. So they're almost concurrent, right? Like the NMT and the pandemic. So we're seeing sort of this change in technology and the change in the level of demand. It's a very interesting sort of dovetail there between the two. All right. So if there are no questions so far, I'm going to jump into the first pivot, and I'll tell you where these come from. These are not my personal beliefs, not my belief system, although certainly in some way it'll probably reflect my beliefs, but I'm going to tell you where I got this. I'm going to share with you 3 pivots that I've seen in translators who have taken workshops with me or that I've talked to in various conferences. So these are things that like people have written to me on LinkedIn sometimes, or they sent me a quick email or wanted to do a Zoom because they were excited and wanted to talk to me about what's happened when they've started using NMT. And sometimes it's very different from what they thought would happen. So the first sort of pivot that I've seen is initially, I think many people, when they start using NMT, have a fear reaction. I know I did. Sort of feeling like, hey, this is new, it's scary. Is this going to hurt my business? Does this mean that I have to do this? I have to do that. I have to go out and spend money and learn the tool and this and that. And there's also, I think, concurrently this idea that like, there's only one solution, right? Like, and we've heard some of the same solutions recommended again and again. I don't want to get too much into specific ones, but there are certain engines that like people say like, oh, NMT you're talking about, and then they'll mention whatever engine, like some engine from Europe or something. And it's like, no, there are many different NMT solutions. And that's part of the issue, I think, is when you're just starting with these technologies, it can feel like it's this one overwhelming thing, whereas actually there are many different interesting options out there that can serve you once you've clearly identified your needs. So, but the initial reaction, I think, for many of us is fear, kind of feeling boxed in, feeling like, there's only one tool out there, or I don't have many choices. And it's like, I have to adapt.
Can I so a question in the chat, Joe, that I think ties in really well with the fear element. Vicky just wrote in the chat. As history shows, automation leads to cuts, which is scary for us and everyone in the business. The future seems quite a bit uncertain. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, that's a great point. You're talking about automation, right? In this particular case with NMT, we're not actually seeing automation. There's very little. I mean, there is material that's being translated directly online with Google Translate, for example, using NMT, and that's true. But those are not typically the kinds of texts that are going to be translated by a professional translator anyway. And something actually a really interesting point that I think connects well with this is there has been research recently into post-editing and NMT and how it's changing the translation industry.
Yeah.
One of the key books out there is called Translation, Revision, and Post-Editing by Brian Mossop and colleagues. Maybe I can show you the book really quick. It's really worth it if you're sort of more analytical. This is really a book for researchers, but I've gone through it quite carefully to see what I could get out of it, what I could glean from this. And one of the takeaways here is that they're saying now that NMT is probably not a disruptive technology after all. It actually more closely aligns with the definition of sort of an evolving technology or a shift. But basically NMT is not as big a game changer as everyone kind of thought it was when it initially came out. Sort of the same thing with translation memories, right? And those of you who have been in the business long enough know that when memories came out, and certain multinationals started using fuzzy matches in their pricing arrangements and things like that, many translators actually left the business. But translation memories did not kill translation. It's quite the opposite. You know, those who are able to use it effectively are able to do much better. And few translators today would go back to working without some kind of a CAT tool. So I would suggest that this is not, I mean, yes, it's a big change. NMT is a change, but it's not quite as earth-shattering as we might have thought initially. It's more of a qualitative, ongoing shift. But I don't think that NMT is taking away our jobs. You know, there are too many things that you need a human for. When you look at the kinds of text, and you can think for yourselves, for all of you who are listening in, you know, think about the kinds of translations you've seen done with NMT tools. Even the very best ones really require that human intervention. And NMT is not going to change in the sense that the technology is not able to produce an exactly human translation. It can do a great job, it can save you time, but it's not the way that it works, it's not a technology that's able to, for example, consistently factor in principles of comparative stylistics and, you know, what makes for a compelling sentence. It's going to require a little bit of brushing up. So I don't feel too much fear in that respect.
And I
But
think
go
it
ahead.
ties beautifully into what Betty was saying the second session during our course, right? And what makes a truly great NMT solution is how you make sure that you keep it with the translator at the center, or the principle of having a translator in a loop, for sure. Another
Absolutely.
question, Joe, something that ties into what you were saying a few slides above. Someone from the group wants to know if there's pressure to lower your rates or even salaries because of the use of MT. The rationale being that translators are now using MTs and TMs, and they may think that this is an excuse or it requires less efforts from a translator.
Right. These are super delicate and important topics, but let's do it. Let's have this conversation. We have the opportunity. Let's do it. Uh, I personally, the cases where I've seen issues, there are basically two places where I have seen actual negative impacts, but they're kind of reassuring in a way. You'll see what I mean. The number one case is self-imposed. So translators who go to their clients and say, hey, boom, I'm offering a 30 or 40% discount. Isn't that great? Again, if you're able to deliver 10 or 15% faster at no extra charge, you're already offering added value. So this is an abusive practice, you know, to start slashing rates. Dentists don't start slashing rates because they're using a new machine that works faster and more consistently, right? You can be darn sure they're going to be raising their rate. So that's some food for thought. Self-imposed limitations is one thing. The way that you talk to your clients is important. I have had one or two clients that have said, hey, here's a text for you to just revise real quick, and it was a DeepL translation. I simply tell them I don't do that. they need to understand that that's not how things work in the industry. Nothing has changed. Translation is still translation. So that's one thing, is self-imposed problems. And I sometimes have people who call me and say, hey, Joe, I've done your NMT workshop. I learned how to use the tool, but my client, I'm wondering how much I should lower my rates. Should I lower them just 10% or should I lower them more? And I tell them, why do you automatically assume that that rates should be lowered? Let's talk about architects. Let's talk about dentists. Let's talk about lawyers and accountants and everyone else who's using NMT today in various ways to speed up their work or make it a little bit better. And none of them are lowering their rates. They've understood that these technologies can be to everyone's advantage if you present it as that added value to your client. And so I question that notion that automatically we should lower rates. And the second issue I do think, and this is sort of beyond the scope of what I can really address in terms of solutions, but I do think that there's downward pressure on agencies. Agencies do have this problem with their clients sometimes saying, especially when they have a bidding system, they have to bid for these big jobs. They have some of their clients who are sort of aware of these technologies and who sometimes are demanding lower rates. And that's sort of a systemic problem. I'm not sure I have the solution to this other than to encourage people to hold the line, and to refuse to back down and start slashing rates. I personally am not doing it as a freelancer and as a translator who works with other translators. We do not play that game. We consider that if everyone bands together and upholds professional conditions, then we can continue to thrive. But if you begin lowering rates yourself, then of course you're going to have a problem, and that's going to go nowhere fast. So that's sort of my view on the topic.
No, that's good, and we appreciate your transparency, Joe. I'll let you carry on with the presentation, and then a quick
right.
question from Nina when you're done with this slide.
Okay, perfect. So what I have seen on many occasions where I've had people do my workshops and they initially had this fear reaction. Sometimes they write to me a little later, or we have a conversation later and they tell me about what's going on. Here are some of the nice things I've heard from people. Some people have said, wow, I can't believe how quickly how quickly the technology is changing and evolving. That's sort of a neutral comment. One thing I love to hear is, oh, I understand now, NMT isn't a tool, it's a technology, and there are lots of tools out there. So for example, I'm going to take an easy example because I have Lucia right here, but if you're translating text in Canada, there are certain engines that are specialized based on Canadian text. And so they will make you gain a lot of time compared to engines that were developed in Europe or Germany or Italy, like Modern MT. So there are many tools, and it's really more about sort of saying, hey, I've got this work, I've got this job, what would be the best tool for this job? And so that puts you back in the driver's seat. And that's what I love about hearing this. It's not a single tool. It's about giving you your power. The other thing I love to hear is, okay, I get it. Translation is still translation. And we had actually a number of people talking about this at the OTAC conference recently after a pair of researchers presented their findings. They were saying maybe, translation is headed more toward becoming revision, like there won't be translation services. It's just going to become revising. And I had to grab the mic and tell them it's interesting that they brought that up, because according to the latest research, including this book on translation revision and post-editing, according to the latest studies, so studies that use key logging and eye tracking and other like quantitative research methods, they are saying that essentially translation might be moving more on a sliding scale. It's moving a little closer to editing, but it's not editing. It's not the same skill set as an editor. It's really, translation still requires the ability to sort of imagine the situation, what you're talking about in the text. You need that intercultural knowledge. You need to be aware of style, but you also need to be aware of sort of the background, how people talk about things in two completely different cultures. And so the jury is in, and translation is still translation. And this was reinforced, by the way, by the standard. There's an ISO standard on post-editing, and it's an incredibly dry document. I'm not gonna lie. But one of the things that I got out of it is that they clearly say that based on their data and what they've decided to recommend internationally, post-editing must be done by a translator. very, very interesting that they came to that conclusion independently. So you still need translation skills to post edit. It's not just editing skills to clean something up. You need actual translation skills to translate, even if you're using this technology. So that's a very, very, very interesting sort of piece of information right there. The other thing I love to hear is people telling me, I'm prouder than ever to be a translator, you know, like, and I've seen a few posts on this on LinkedIn, like, I am a translator, you know. I posted one myself saying, I'm not a post editor. I'm not a reviser. I respect revisers. I'm not a writer. You know, I'm not a post anything any more than an architect using CAD is a post architect. No, I am a translator and you are a translator, and let's take pride in that title.
I love a post architect. That's a good one. Before we go into the second pivot, if you don't mind, Joe, there's a question in the group from Lena.
Sure.
She's wondering if there are any pressures to turn projects around faster now because of NMT. So is that something that clients are asking for upfront?
I mean, I personally don't have clients who are asking for faster turnaround upfront. And I think the reason is that many of them today are aware that we're overwhelmed in translation, because everywhere they turn, translators are telling them like, oh man, I'm booked for, you know, the next couple of weeks or the next month. And so, you know, I'm thinking of someone who called me even earlier this week and saying like, oh, so, you know, I know that everyone's super busy in translation, but would you be able to fit this in? And so I think that by now, because the demand is so high, um, many clients are aware that turnaround times are going to have to factor in the additional work as well. And then the other piece is that we need to make sure we don't sort of dig our own hole and make sure that we give realistic turnaround times. Remember, anytime you give a deadline, you may get another job or 2 or 5 or 10 jobs that come between the time you start the job and the time you deliver it. So you always have to try and negotiate as much time as you possibly can and tell your client that's for quality purposes. So yeah, there's no perfect solution, but those are things that I tend to work with. And I think I sometimes shock my clients with my turnaround times, but I try to, you know, very early on in the relationship, I make sure that they understand that this is not a same day service. You know, if you give me a 5,000 word text, I'm going to need at least 2 weeks. If it's something more difficult, like an academic text, it's minimum 3 weeks. And so they don't get used to like a same day or next day kind of a thing. It's like they, you know, with me, it's going to take time. And again, it's kind of like pricing, right? If we all do this, if we all establish professional conditions, whether it's in terms of time or rates, then I think we have no problem. The issue is when we start sort of creating a problem by creating unrealistic expectations. I'm not sure if that helps, but that's sort of my position on that.
No, I think you're capturing the mindset of a lot of people in the group, so it's great.
Awesome. All right. So let's get to it. The second pivot, servant or master. Are you the servant or are you the master? I think that for many of us, again, when the technology came out, it's like, again, this sense of having to cope and feeling sort of powerless, feeling overwhelmed. And it's true, it is overwhelming. If if you've never used an NMT tool and suddenly you change overnight, it's a big shift. There's also sometimes this sense of conformity, like I have to do what everyone else is doing. But thankfully, that's not necessarily the case. You can choose your methods. And by the way, there are times when I don't use NMT at all. You know, there's no rule that says that you have to. I'm going to basically, that's my approach. When I get a translation, I'll try to find the right tool for that job, and that's what has really paid off. So again, sort of getting out of this reactive mindset and more like, I have possibilities, I have tools at my disposal, and I'm going to choose the one. Or if I don't know, I'm going to ask someone what they think would be the best tool for this particular job. Sometimes Logiterm is the tool for a job, and sometimes Alexa is going to be absolutely phenomenal. There are other cases, you know, the other day I saved maybe 3 or 4 hours on a job and was able to do really well and charge a nice rate for a job where there were documents that were digitized, but they were not convertible. I couldn't convert them into Word. So it was like this mess of PDF documents. And using that little DeepL snagging tool, I was able to grab all the text with almost no mistakes and enter that into a fresh document and get the job done in record time. So there are no new tools coming out all the time. It's more about like, okay, things are okay. I'm going to breathe. I have options. There are different tools, and then it's more about I'm in control. I'm going to choose the right tool for the job and use it to my advantage. So it's going to benefit my client and also benefit my pocketbook. That's sort of how I take it.
And Joe, just a quick question on that, because Betty mentioned this as well as Kate and even Jason in the beginning of the webinar. There is no blanket solution for all translators, right? But could it be that, and I'm asking this as an open-ended question for you, the more specialized you are, the easier it is to find something that is your go-to solution? You don't need an arsenal of tools and different technologies.
Exactly. That's exactly right. There's certain solutions I use for most of my work, and then for other jobs, I'll go to something else. I do think that thankfully, I mean, it's not like you need to have 10 different licenses. I do. I have licenses to everything, but that's because I teach a lot of these technologies, and it's actually been really beneficial for my own translation work, because I can sort of use the right one. But if I can sort of put you at ease, it's true. Once you find the right tool for most of the kind of work you do, I think you don't need to necessarily own all of them, but it's worth sort of going through that exploration and seeing what's going to serve me best for the kind of work that I do. And in terms of specialization, the most successful translators I know tend to have one specialization, maybe at very most two. Right. That's usually what you need to really do very well for yourself in translation. That's sort of ideal in my personal opinion, if you have one or two specializations. And so if you constantly translate the same kinds of text, you'll probably be able to use one technology for most of them at least. But that one tool might not serve all your needs. So that's sort of how I see it.
And it goes back to what you were saying about the investment, right? It's all about that initial upfront investment. And when you have a working solution, then it's easy to go ahead.
Absolutely. Here's some things I like to hear from people who get in touch with me. I'm spending more time on the interesting challenges. That's nice. That's exactly what we want, right? This is sort of what translation memories promised, and not everyone felt they entirely delivered. But it's true that if you can, roughly 1 in 5 segments does not require intervention in post-editing in most fields. That's the industry standard right now. I don't know if that's what you're seeing with Alexa, Lucia. That's sort of what I've seen.
We've seen it highly depends again on the type of text that you have. We've seen better results, especially with again, people that are highly specialized. So I'm thinking, for example, someone who does a strictly legal and financial, we can get better results. But as a rule of thumb, this is more or less the stat that we have. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, of course, it'll go up or it'll go down depending on what you do. But there's always a little bit that that requires very little intervention, or segments that don't require changes. And so that's great because it frees up more time to work on language, work on the interesting cultural issues that come up in translation. And I think that's why most of us do the work. We're not in it to, we do this work for a reason, right? Because we love language, because we love cultures. For most of us, I think that's why we do it, not necessarily to revise an engine. So that's good. And then I love hearing things like I'm in control of how I work, and for some jobs you can say I don't use NMT, or I don't use a CAT tool for this job. If I do a marketing job, I'm not going to use NMT personally. I'm going to get out my pencil and paper. I'm going to start jotting down ideas, and maybe I'll take a walk. And so that'll be my technology of choice for maybe a tagline or something. So that's a good feeling. I'm in control of how I work. I also like hearing post-editing is a mental relief. It's true, we don't have that blank page syndrome. So that's sort of the cup half full. One nice thing is that we have something to work with. And finally, NMT can also get you thinking in different directions. Remember that NMT is based on human translations. It's based on professional human texts written in your source and target language. It is sort of repatched together through the NMT, the algorithm process, but still, bottom line, fundamentally, these are human translations, and that's why the technology has improved so much. And so that being the case, at least some of the time, I find that I look over a translation from my NMT provider and I go, hey, I wouldn't have thought of that, but that's actually a really good way to say it, you know? So that's sort of the nice part, is that sometimes it does get you thinking in different ways and get you out of a rut.
And it's been requested by quite a few translators, Joe, to give you a quick history of Alexa and a new development that we recently added. We included suggestions, so now you're able to see different formulations of a single sentence, and translators have been requesting this for a bit of time now, and they were saying this gets me thinking in different directions. It helps me to see or look at sentences in a different light, or even help me with suggestions that I haven't thought of. So it's something that is highly requested and truly appreciated by translators, for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that's where the future is. And again, the nice thing is that it puts you in control. You know, no one says you have to adopt what's being suggested, but hey, you can check out these different solutions, and based on your expertise, you can perhaps find the one that's going to be most idiomatic, or that's going to best sort of follow the logic of the paragraph. And so I think that's a really great development.
And something that Katerina shared with us in the chat, and I think is widely overlooked in the advantages of new technologies. She's saying that it makes translation more accessible. For instance, she's developing arthritis in her fingers, and it can be a huge relief for her to translate.
Absolutely, we're spending less time typing. There's no doubt about
Exactly.
it. Conversely, interestingly, I feel some things are changing in a way we have to be mindful of. For example, I find that I'm more glued to the screen when post-editing, and so I really have to remind myself to take breaks for my eyes and things like that. So in some of my workshops, we go over strategies to take better care of your eyes in the era of NMT. But absolutely, I think that's a good point. All right, I can't believe it. Time is just zooming by here. We're going to go to our third pivot on sort of learning to, or teaching ourselves to think in win-win language, if you will. So it's easy to think in terms of win-lose, right? Maybe your client is going to win, but you're going to lose, or the agency is going to win, but the freelancer is going to lose, or some variation of that, or maybe the agency's client is going to win, the agency is going to win, but the freelancer is going to lose, and so those are all valid concerns. I think that win-lose mentality is sort of a very competition and scarcity-based way of seeing things. The notion that that we don't really have any added value, or we don't have any cards to play with, you know. And again, that's why I come back to that idea that you can also tell your clients, if they ever ask you, you know, do you use these technologies? You don't have to be ashamed. You can actually be proud and tell them, yes, I use the right tool for the job, and as a result, I'm able to deliver a little bit more quickly at no extra cost to you. I know I keep hammering this home, but it's such a fundamental piece there, that we do have cards that we can play with, you know, cards up our sleeve. I think we don't have to be too afraid. And so here's some nice things that I've heard from translators who have started using these technologies, who've gotten the hang of it, who are starting to boost their income, who are really thriving more than ever. So here's some nice things I've heard. Variations on, we offer fantastic added value. So that's something you can use in your marketing, that you use the right tool for the job, or you use such and such tool that that will get the job done a little bit more quickly for your client. That there are also various ways that technology can add value, even besides translation. I see one of the questions was about, how do you convert PDF? Well, that's an example, you know, because I was familiar with that DeepL snagging tool, I was able to, without even converting PDF, I was able to grab all this embedded text and instantly put it into a Word document and take care of something in a jiffy. So there are all kinds of ways that technology can play to our advantage, and you don't have to be ashamed. You know, if my client asked me, how did you do it? I wouldn't have to say like, oh, you know, I methodically took the text and I retranscribed every word into another document. No, I could tell them, because I know many different tools and I invest in my skills, I know what tool to use for the job to be highly effective, and the price is going to reflect that. And that's normal, just like for any other professional. So I like this idea of adding value. I love hearing everyone wins. You know, it's a win-win. That's why, again, I don't personally see any reason to lower rates. You know, it's already a win for your client if you're able to serve them more quickly, for example. I also love hearing things like, finally, I feel like a trusted advisor. In French, they talk about the rôle conseil or advisory role. So feeling like you're able to give valuable advice when your clients have questions or when they have a document to translate and they're not sure what way to go. You can play that role and sort of make recommendations. Something else I love to hear, I'm in a position of power and so is my client. So again, you don't have to sort of hide this, hide your use of technology. It's not something to be ashamed of. And I think that, again, this is like many things, even before NMT, right? I remember one translator who came to speak in a class that I was teaching, and she was saying, oh, I always hire a reviser, but I never tell my client because I don't want them to think that I'm not good and that I need to have my work revised. And I told her, oh, that's an interesting perspective. I would think that if I were a client, I would be delighted. I would say, wow, this is you're having the text read over by an industry expert or someone with 35 years of experience in the field or a second translator, and at no extra charge to me. That's a huge selling point, right? Why would you hide that? So it's like many things. I think it's just again, that's why this whole presentation is focused on these pivots, sort of changing how we see things to see if is there another way we can think about it. Another thing I hear sometimes, I'm able to discuss how I use technology. So it's no longer sort of a point of fear or contention. It's like, we can talk about this openly. We can have a conversation about it. If your client asks, you can talk about it. Almost none of my clients ask me about my technology use. But if they do, it's not something that I particularly feel fear about, something that I can sell to them. And finally, I love hearing simply, my business is thriving. That's always nice to hear. And I think that whether you're an agency or a freelancer today, many of us are doing very well because of those huge volumes. Then it sort of becomes, how do we manage that volume? And thankfully, NMT sort of entered the picture at the same time as this huge spike in translation demand. I think it's very what's the word? Serendipitous. Isn't that a nice word? It's a very serendipitous that the technology came about roughly at the same time as this huge spike in workload. Did you have anything to add, or did you have any questions you wanted to bring up, or anyone in the chat?
No, so far so good. Liliana was asking if you could share the author from the book that you recommended.
Yes, absolutely. So it's called maybe I can write it in the chat. Let's see if I can figure out how to write it in the chat here. Yes, I have it. Okay. It is a book for researchers, so it's not light reading. But if you're game, if you want to do some heavy duty reading and check out some research findings, this is really more of a book by researchers for researchers on the state of the art. I really had to read it carefully to find a few actionable takeaways, because that's not the focus of this book. But if you want some data, hard data, this is definitely the place to go. It's really at the very cutting edge.
Oh, for sure.
Alrighty, I see we're almost out of time. So looking to the future here, we'll wrap up and then we'll take questions. I think Gary also is going to jump in and say a few words. So we'll conclude first. So here are my I don't dare call these recommendations. Here's some suggestions and some ways, perhaps some ideas to play around with. Perhaps we can think about the idea of being doctors when it comes to our work tools. And what I mean by that is, you expect a doctor to know their tools inside out, right? You really expect them to know every detail. And if we want to be taken as professionals and treated like professionals, I think that we should know our tools really, really well too. Even if we aren't necessarily passionate about technology, it's really to our advantage, I think, to do so. So when you know your tools well, you can choose the right one, and that pays off for the translator as well as the client. So I suggest that we kind of move toward a doctor mentality in that respect. And perhaps when it comes to the future, we can become sort of Zen monks, Change will always happen. Change is inevitable. The key then becomes, how do we respond? Is there a way that we can see this not as a threat, but as an opportunity? Most of us have fared quite well during the pandemic. It becomes more about, how can we make this sustainable? How can we recharge our batteries so we don't get burned out? That's important too. But the change is always going to happen. And so we have to maybe see that as a constant rather than as something overwhelming. And last but not least, perhaps we can become business people about our value and learn to use that word, value and added value, when we are able to talk about that value with clients, whether we're speaking to them on Zoom or even an email. I think that we really have a huge advantage in talking about the value that we provide. One thing that I'll do sometimes with clients, especially new ones, is I will list out the different steps of the translation so they see why it's so valuable. Because in their mind, you're sort of a smart photocopy machine. But if you can say, oh, thank you so much for your documents. So between the document conversion and reformatting, the keyword analysis and the translation and the editing and final review or the certification if you're certifying a translation. So I'll mention those up front in a quote often, especially for larger jobs for new clients, because they'll often send the same email to many translators, right? You know, how much do you charge? Here's a document. What does it cost? And so I try to get away from cost and sort of talk about the value of the work. And also I'll mention, you know, you can check out my style. Here's some URLs to my published translations to see if you think that I'd be a good fit for your needs. And so clients often will respond very positively to talking about value, not in a way like you're showing off, not in a way that you're trying to be a salesman, but just saying, hey, there is value in the work to be done. I have value to bring to the table because I have experience. You know, if you have 20 years of experience in a given field, you can mention that as well. You can say something like, I would be delighted to take this on. It just so happens that I have 20 years of experience translating these kinds of documents. Here are a few quick links if you want to see my style, and let me know if you want to do a quick Zoom call. So those are things that can be very, very, very effective for selling our services. And I think moving toward becoming business people, I know that most of us in translation, myself included, we're introverted. Some people are shocked to find out that I'm an introvert because I am online a lot and I teach a lot, including in front of very large groups. But in my private life, I'm a very quiet person. If you put me in a party with people I don't know, I will gravitate toward the chips instantly. Chips and beer, that's where you'll find me. But all this to say, even if you're introverted, even if you're a word person, it's important, I think, to at least sort of become comfortable talking about the value that you're providing so that your clients know that you're the right person and so that you can be treated like a professional, which is what we all want, I think, at the end of the day.
That's great. It's always a pleasure to hear you on the topic, Joe. Like you said, time is just zooming by, so I'll just leave the 2 remaining minutes to Gary, our CEO, who had some closing remarks. Again, thank you all for joining the 4-week session. It was a pleasure to have you. And Gary, I'll let you take it away to wrap up the course.
Thank you, Lucia. Great to see you, Joe. Always avant-garde in your thinking with your tools. In fact, I remember us chatting, what was almost a year ago now, and how you were using dictation effectively. And one of the things I went back to the tech team with is like, how can we marry this with our MT? Because clearly it would make people's lives easier. And we had multiple instances that came up where it was very clear that it actually did make life easier. So much like you said, Joe, these are sort of takeaways that I suggest and would recommend. And I've tried to distill them in 9, which I will do 9 in 90 seconds. Let's see how effective I can be. MT is imperfect, and it really is a tool in your arsenal, and it's as good as you keep training it. So dedicate the time to train it, but just think of it as a tool in your arsenal. Plan for implementation. It won't happen instantaneously, just like any other tool that really changes the way you work. It needs some time to adapt, to spend, to really learn well, etc. Some of you will recall using as simple as Microsoft Office tools. Learning Word effectively requires so much work. So really plan for that time. Demand a technology that has a support system. So account managers that can help, customer service support that can really help you do the implementation. So the onus and the hard work isn't just on you, but there's that support system along the way. It's so critical. Good technology without good support, it's only half the battle. You really need both sides of the equation. So it came up, do we lower rates? Are we expected to turn things around faster? And I don't think you need to do either, but you are handling more volume in the same time. So this is your value add. So if you're in internal departments, you're handling more volume. If you are dealing externally, you don't need to lower costs, but inevitably you are producing things for them a little faster, even though I do recommend don't promise faster turnarounds right away until you get comfortable with the tools. Look for tech that is consistently evolving to you as an individual, as an organization, but also listening to you and implementing feedback that you give. Critical. You want to do that from the get-go, because sometimes you'll sign up for something and it's multi-year, and you want to make sure from the get-go that you ask those questions. Speed and efficiency will come, but learn to be disciplined and use the tools effectively. And so don't have realistic expectations, knowing that some of these things will come in time. For organizations, so translation departments or translation LSPs, I recommend dedicating one or more experts to it. Kate spoke about that last week, really important. Don't be fearful of the technology and of MT. Embrace it. Imagine where we would be today if we were fearful of cars instead of horses, or computers instead of typewriters. We still enjoy typewriters and horses for fun, but that's not our day-to-day transportation. And there's real value to embracing it and adjusting to it. And the last one, get mentors, help ecosystems like this, because none of us are perfect. We can always learn, and learning from the group is so valuable.
Thank you so much, Gary. Yeah, I'm so sorry I didn't leave you much time at the end. That was remarkable. You got through that in such short time, and super complimentary to everything I've said. So thank you very much for adding that.
And thank you. Sorry, Lucia, go ahead.
No, I was going to say thank you to our participants for joining during the month that we spent together. I hope you learned something new, that you change your attitude towards technology, and that we managed to distill whatever knowledge we had, especially from our panelists in the 4 little short sessions that we had. Our sessions will be available on our website. You will also get emails with the links to the sessions if you missed any, or if you want to go back and look at them again. You can also contact our panelists. So they were kind enough to share their contact information. You'll see at the end of every presentation, you have the contact information for our panelists, and Joe especially, who has a great academy and who keeps himself very, very busy. So if you want to take a look at his website or just send him a quick email, you have his contact information. Thank you so much. Thank you again to everyone.
You will receive the certificates electronically. If you missed a session, just watch it offline. They are recorded, and you will, but we'll handle some of this offline as well.
Exactly. Thank you all again for being with us today, and wishing you a fantastic afternoon.
You too.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.